For 400 years, the most feared soldiers in Europe were legally slaves. They were forbidden to marry, forbidden to own land, forbidden to even grow a beard, taken from their families as children, and legally classified as the personal property of one man, the Sultan. And somehow, this slave army didn't just help conquer half the known world. Eventually, it grew so powerful that it started deciding which sultans were allowed to keep their heads. Once every few years, Ottoman officials rode into Christian villages across the Balkans carrying a list of names. They weren't collecting taxes, they were collecting children. This was the devshirme, the boy levy. And by the time this system had run for 4 centuries, it had built one of the most effective fighting forces in human history, out of the very children it stole. This is the story of how the Ottoman Empire turned kidnapping into an instrument of statecraft, and how the weapon it built to control everything eventually became impossible to control. The system began in the late 1300s under Sultan Murad I. Ottoman rulers had a problem every medieval monarch understood too well. The nobles who commanded their armies also had their own loyalties, their own ambitions, and occasionally their own plans to seize the throne. The empire at this point was still young. It had expanded out of a small Anatolian principality into the Balkans with remarkable speed. But that speed created a structural weakness. Every conquered territory brought new local lords, new tribal leaders, new powerful men who owed the Sultan loyalty in theory and pursued their own interests in practice. Murad's solution was radical. Build an army loyal to nothing but the Sultan himself, soldiers with no family, no clan, no homeland, no competing allegiance of any kind. Men who had nothing before the Sultan gave them everything, and therefore had no reason to betray the hand that fed them. So every few years, officials swept through the empire's Christian territories in the Balkans, Serbia, Bulgaria, Albania, Bosnia, Greece, and took a quota of boys, usually the strongest and most promising, roughly 1 in every 40 households. The boys had to be between 8 and 18 years old. They had to be healthy. They had to be intelligent. Families had no right of refusal. Fathers who resisted were punished. This was not chaotic raiding. This was bureaucratic kidnapping, organized by the state, on a regular schedule, for centuries. The boys were sent first to Anatolian farms, placed with Turkish families, put through hard physical labor, and taught the Turkish language and Islamic faith. It took years. It was, by design, a total erasure of their old identity. The boy from the Serbian village was supposed to forget his village, forget his language, forget his church. By the time the process was done, he was Ottoman in everything but blood. The most promising were then moved into elite palace schools in Istanbul, Edirne, or Bursa, where they studied alongside the empire's future administrators. Calligraphy, Islamic theology, mathematics, horsemanship, archery, military tactics. The curriculum was serious. The competition was real. Boys who excelled could end up as provincial governors, treasury officials, senior military commanders. The rest were funneled directly into military training as Janissary recruits. What makes this system so unsettling isn't just the kidnapping, Plenty of empires stole and enslaved people. It's how methodically the Ottomans turned that theft into an actual career ladder. A kidnapped 10-year-old from a Serbian village could realistically end up running the empire's finances or commanding its armies. That's not a footnote to the horror. In a strange way, it's exactly what made the horror so effective. The boys had every incentive to succeed, because success was the only identity left to it. Some of the empire's most powerful grand viziers started life exactly this way, stolen as children, and rising purely on ability to run one of the largest empires on earth. Ibrahim Pasha, the closest friend and most powerful minister of Suleiman the Magnificent, was a devshirme boy from Greece. Sokolu Mehmed Pasha, who served 3 sultans and essentially ran the empire for 15 years, was taken from a Serbian family in Bosnia. These were not accidents. They were the intended product of a system specifically designed to find talent wherever it existed, strip it of competing loyalties, and put it to work for the throne. The soldiers produced by this system became known as the Janissaries, from Janissary, meaning new soldier. And what they built was, for its time, genuinely revolutionary. They lived together in barracks, separated from civilian society. They ate together from massive communal cauldrons, a detail that sounds trivial until you realize those cauldrons became the sacred center of Janissary identity. Each company, called an orta, had its own cauldron. The company commander's title was literally soup maker. To eat from the cauldron was to serve. To overturn it was a declaration of mutiny, a signal so loaded with meaning that every person in the empire understood exactly what it meant the moment they saw it happen. The Janissaries were also one of the first standing infantry corps in Europe, built specifically around gunpowder weapons. While most European armies were still scrambling to integrate firearms into existing feudal structures, knights who didn't want to fight on foot, noble cavalry who considered gunpowder weapons beneath their dignity, the Janissaries had no such problems. They had no traditions to protect and no pride of status to offend. By the early 1400s, they were already drilling with early firearms. By the 1500s, they were among the most technically proficient gunpowder infantry on Earth. They were trained year-round, not just assembled for a single campaign season and sent home. They were paid quarterly, in coin, directly by the state, not in land grants, not in feudal obligation, not in loyalty to a local lord who might decide to switch sides. In cash, from the Sultan to soldiers who belonged to no one else. The discipline this produced was visible on the battlefield in ways that shocked contemporary observers. European travelers who watched Janissary drills in the 15th and 16th centuries came home describing something that looked more like a modern professional army than anything they had seen in the West. Silence in formation, precision in movement, the kind of unit cohesion that only comes from men who have literally lived together their entire adult lives. They even brought their own psychological weapon onto the battlefield, the meter, a military band of drums, cymbals, zurna pipes, and giant kettle drums designed to be as loud and as rhythmically overwhelming as possible. The meter marched at the front of the Janissary columns as they advanced. European soldiers on the receiving end frequently described the sound alone as terrifying before a single shot was fired. It was not decoration, it was a weapon, and it worked. In 1453, this machine was pointed at the single most fortified city on earth, Constantinople, protected by the Theodosian walls, triple walls, 15 meters high at points, with towers every 50 meters, surrounded by a moat, and unbreached for over 1,000 years. Sultan Mehmed II was 21 years old when he laid siege to the city in April of 1453. He had a Hungarian engineer named Urban who had built him the largest cannon in the world. Urban had originally offered his services to the Byzantine emperor. The emperor couldn't afford him. Mehmed could. The siege lasted 53 days. The city's defenders, perhaps 7,000 men against an Ottoman army of 60 to 80,000, held with desperate skill. Every breach was patched at night. And then, on the night of May 28th, Mehmed sent everything at once. The first wave were the irregulars, poorly armed and expendable, sent to exhaust the defenders. The second wave were the Anatolian infantry. And then, when both waves had spent themselves against the walls, Mehmed sent the Janissaries. They came in tight formation, shields locked, moving in step, the meter drumming behind them. Wave after wave, absorbing catastrophic losses, simply because the Sultan had an endless supply of soldiers who had never belonged to anyone but him and had nowhere to retreat to. A Genoese commander named Giovanni Giustiniani, who had held a critical section of the wall through the entire siege with extraordinary skill, was wounded in the final hours and carried from the walls. His men broke. A small gate, the Cercoporta, had been left unlocked in the confusion of the assault. Ottoman soldiers poured through it. The city fell in hours. 1,000 years of Byzantine history ended not with a dramatic last stand, but with an unlocked gate and a wounded commander being carried to a ship. And it ended largely because of an army built entirely out of stolen children. There's a detail here that I think gets lost in the spectacle of the siege. Many of those Janissaries storming the walls of a Christian empire's last great capital had been Christian themselves, less than a decade earlier. The system didn't just build soldiers, it built men with no path back to who they used to be. That's arguably the darkest part of the whole design, and also the reason it worked. If you want the full story of what it felt like inside those walls, the empire on the receiving end, the civilization that had held those walls for 1,000 years, we told that whole story in our video on the fall of Constantinople. Under Suleiman the Magnificent in the 1500s, the Janissaries reached the peak of their power and prestige. The empire stretched from Hungary to the Persian Gulf, from Algeria to the borders of Persia, and Janissary regiments were the tip of nearly every spear that got it there. At the Battle of Chaldiran in 1514, Janissary musketeers stood their ground against Persian cavalry charges and cut them apart with coordinated volley fire. One of the earliest large-scale demonstrations of disciplined gunpowder infantry, defeating traditional cavalry in open battle. In 1516 and 1517, the Ottomans swept through Syria and Egypt in under 2 years, destroying the Mamluk Sultanate and absorbing the Arab heartland of the Islamic world. Then came Hungary. The Battle of Mohacs in 1526 lasted less than 2 hours. The Hungarian kingdom was effectively destroyed in an afternoon. The Janissaries advanced in silence, opened fire at close range, and then closed with swords before the smoke had cleared. They marched to the gates of Vienna in 1529, deep into the heart of Central Europe, further than any Ottoman army had gone before or would go again. The siege ultimately failed, stopped by autumn rains and supply lines stretched to their absolute limit. But the fact that an army had marched from Istanbul to Vienna at all was a statement about what the Janissaries, at their peak, were capable of. At home, they were treated less like slaves and more like the empire's most privileged class, exempt from most taxes. The right to petition the Sultan directly, and even, oddly enough, a genuine literary culture. Janissary veterans were known to gather in coffee houses to trade poetry as often as war stories. Several notable Ottoman poets came from Janissary backgrounds. For nearly 2 centuries, this system worked almost exactly as designed. Absolute loyalty, ruthless effectiveness, and promotion based purely on ability. It was, in its own brutal way, one of the most functional military institutions in the early modern world. But by the 1600s, the system that made the Janissaries so effective started quietly rotting from the inside. Freeborn Muslim families began bribing officials to enroll their sons in the Janissary rolls, not for glory or combat, but for the salary, the tax exemptions, and the political weight that came with the uniform. At first, this was technically illegal. Then it became an open secret. Then it became standard practice. By the 1600s, the devshirme itself had largely stopped. Membership became hereditary. Sons inherited their father's places on the rolls. The corps that had numbered around 12,000 tightly trained men under Suleiman swelled to perhaps 50,000 by the mid-17th century, most of whom had purchased their membership and had no intention of being tested on it. Training collapsed. Janissaries increasingly lived not in barracks, but in the city, running shops and businesses. An institution that had once been built entirely on merit slowly filled up with men who had never seen a real battlefield, but who still carried the same political power their predecessors had earned with blood. And that power came with a very specific, very dangerous habit. Whenever the Janissaries were unhappy with a sultan's decisions, a new tax, a military reform, a favorite official they didn't like, they overturned the cauldrons in the street. Everyone in the empire understood exactly what that meant. In 1622, that ritual escalated into something that had been unthinkable for most of Ottoman history. Sultan Osman II made the mistake of letting his plans to rebuild the military become known before his preparations were complete. The Janissaries moved first. They seized him, deposed him, and had him executed. The first time in Ottoman history that the Sultan's own soldiers had killed him directly. This is the part of the story that I think should genuinely unsettle anyone paying attention, not just history nerds. The Janissaries were built to be the ultimate safeguard against internal threats to the throne, soldiers who belonged to no one but the Sultan. And they became the single greatest internal threat the throne ever faced. Not because of an outside enemy, because they were given total power, left unaccountable for 200 years, and power without accountability always ends the same way. It's not really a story about one broken institution. It's a warning that repeats itself across every civilization that has ever tried to build it. Over the following 2 centuries, Janissary revolts deposed or killed multiple sultans. Selim III, who attempted serious military modernization in the late 1700s, was deposed and later strangled. The corps that had conquered Constantinople and marched to Vienna had become a veto over every sultan who sat on the throne, and used it freely. The empire, meanwhile, was falling behind. European armies were fielding professionally trained infantries with more advanced tactics and better weapons. Ottoman armies that once swept all before them were suffering serious defeats. The Janissaries, once the cutting edge of military innovation, had become a corps that resisted every reform as a threat to its privileges. And they were right. Every reform was a threat to their privileges. That was exactly the point. By the 1820s, Sultan Mahmud II had spent most of his reign carefully watching what happened to sultans who moved too fast. He had watched Selim III die for it. He waited and studied and prepared with a patience that was either remarkable statesmanship or cold-blooded calculation. Probably both. The empire was now in genuine crisis. The Greek War of Independence had begun in 1821, and Janissary forces had performed catastrophically against the Greek rebels, a fact that was humiliating precisely because the rebels were poorly armed and the Janissaries were supposed to be the empire's elite. So Mahmud did something none of his predecessors had managed. Quietly, methodically, he built a new military force trained along European lines, and he secured religious backing from senior Ottoman clergy before any confrontation took place. He closed the exits before he opened the trap. In June 1826, when Mahmud announced the new corps, the Janissaries responded exactly as they always had. They overturned their cauldrons in the streets of Istanbul. They gathered in the hippodrome. They expected the palace to back down. Mahmud had already positioned loyalist artillery around the Janissary barracks before the revolt began. The cannons opened fire directly into their ranks and into the barracks buildings. Fires spread through the wooden structures. Those who fled into the streets were cut down by cavalry. Those who stayed were buried in rubble. The great Janissary barracks, standing at the center of Ottoman military life for 4 centuries, was destroyed in an afternoon. What followed was officially named the Vaka-i Hayriye, the Auspicious Incident. The corps was formally abolished within days, its name erased from official records, its banners burned, the cauldrons melted down. The soldiers who had conquered Constantinople marched to Vienna, and made and unmade sultans for 4 centuries were gone in an afternoon. The Janissaries left behind a strange, split legacy. Military historians still study them as pioneers of the modern standing army. Disciplined, salaried, merit-based, gunpowder-equipped, centuries ahead of most of Europe when the system was first built. The meter influenced European military music so profoundly that Mozart and Beethoven both incorporated what they called the Turkish style into their compositions. And at the same time, they are a permanent case study in how an institution built around a radical, functional idea can survive long enough to become its own opposite. The Janissaries started as men with no power and total discipline. They ended with total power and no discipline at all. The transformation took 400 years. But looking back, it is almost difficult to see how it could have ended any other way. A slave army that helped build one of history's great empires, and very nearly became the reason it couldn't be governed at all. If you want to see the other side of the wall, the Janissaries broke through in 1453, the empire that fell that morning, the civilization that had held those walls for 1,000 years. We told that whole story in our video on the fall of Constantinople. Click it and keep watching.